I never thought my life would change so fast. 1 minute, I was in control, making decisions for my future, and the next, I was staring at two pink lines on a pregnancy test that wasn't even mine. She held it in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly, but her expression was calm. Too calm. "I'm pregnant," she said. I felt the words hit me like a punch to the stomach. "But you said," I started, but she cut me off. "I know what I said," she murmured, her voice softer now, almost apologetic. She had told me it was nearly impossible for her to conceive. She had surgery, complications, something that had supposedly made pregnancy a distant, almost laughable possibility. I had believed her. I had trusted her. And now? I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the small apartment. "We can't do this," I said finally. "You know that." She watched me, her eyes unreadable. "I'm keeping it." I stopped pacing. My body tensed. "We're not ready. Neither of us." She bit her lip. "Maybe not, but it's happening." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I told you from the beginning I'm not ready for a kid. I thought we were being careful. You didn't use a condom," she pointed out. "You didn't want me to." My voice rose, frustration bubbling over. She shrugged. "I didn't think it would happen." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Well, it did. Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. "What are you going to do?" I finally asked. She looked at me, tilting her head slightly. "I already told you. I'm keeping it." "And what about me?" She hesitated, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty in her expression. "I'd like you to be involved. But if you don't want to be, I won't force you." The words didn't comfort me. They only made my stomach twist tighter. I wasn't ready to be a father. I wasn't ready for any of this. But ready or not, my life had just taken a turn I never saw coming. The days after the conversation felt like a blur. I went to work, came home, scrolled through my phone, stared at the ceiling, and repeated. My mind was stuck in a loop, replaying her words over and over. "I'm keeping it." I couldn't accept it. It wasn't fair. I wasn't ready. Neither was she. We could barely afford rent, let alone raise a child. And yet somehow she had made this decision for both of us. I tried to reason with her again a few days later. "Think about it logically," I said, sitting across from her in the tiny diner we sometimes went to. "We don't have the money, the space, or the time. We're barely getting by as it is." She stirred her coffee, not looking at me. "I've thought about it. And..." She finally met my gaze. "I'm still keeping it." I exhaled sharply, leaning back against the booth. "You don't even want a kid," I said, hoping desperately that she'd admit it, that she'd see reason. She hesitated. "I didn't think I could have one. But now that I do, I don't know. It feels different." I shook my head. "That's not a good enough reason." She clenched her jaw. "It's my choice." "And what about my choice?" My voice was sharper than I intended. "I told you from the start I wasn't ready for this." She looked down at her coffee. "I'm not asking you to be involved." I laughed bitterly. "Right, because that makes it all better." We sat in silence. The low hum of conversation from the other tables buzzed around us. But in our little corner, it felt like the world had shrunk down to just this impossible situation we were stuck in. I wanted to be mad. I was mad. But more than that, I was afraid. Afraid of what this meant for my future. Afraid of how this would change everything. Afraid that no matter what I did, there was no way out. I tried to ignore it. For the first few weeks, I pushed the thought of the pregnancy to the back of my mind. If I didn't think about it, maybe it would stop being real. But reality had a way of creeping in. One night, I came home late from work. She was sitting on the couch, her legs curled up beneath her, scrolling through her phone. When she looked up at me, I could tell she had been crying. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice more tired than concerned. She hesitated before saying, "I had my first ultrasound today." Something twisted in my chest. "You went alone?" She shrugged. You didn't want to be involved. I didn't have an answer for that. She wiped her eyes and forced a small smile. I heard the heartbeat. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. She looked down at her lap. It made it feel real. I ran a hand down my face. It is real, I muttered. We sat in silence. Then she whispered, I know you don't want this, but I don't want to do this alone. For the first time since she told me she was pregnant, she looked scared. And for some reason that scared me even more. I didn't sleep that night. Her words kept running through my head. I don't want to do this alone. It was the first time she had said something that made me pause. Before that, I saw her as stubborn, refusing to listen to reason. But now she just looked lost, scared, maybe even as overwhelmed as I was. But did that change anything? The next morning, I left early for work, avoiding any conversation. I needed time to think. At work, my manager, Tony, noticed I was off. You look like hell, he said, handing me a coffee. Thanks, I muttered, taking a sip. What's up? I hesitated, then sighed. My girlfriend's pregnant. Tony let out a low whistle. Damn, you happy about it? I laughed dryly. Not even a little. He nodded. I hear that. First kid's always a shock. I didn't even want a first kid. Tony raised an eyebrow. Ah, that kind of situation. Yeah. He leaned against the counter. I've been there, man. My ex got pregnant way back when. I didn't want it, she did. Ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me. I shook my head. I can't afford this. She can't either. Tony shrugged. You find a way, or you don't. Either way, life moves forward. I frowned. That's not exactly helpful. Wasn't trying to be, he said. Just telling you how it is. I sighed and went back to work. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at my phone. I had typed out at least 5 different messages to her, all of them some variation of, we need to talk. I didn't send any of them. Instead, I tossed my phone aside and lay down staring at the ceiling. Life was moving forward, whether I was ready or not, and I had no idea what to do next. Days passed, then weeks. I didn't avoid her completely, but I didn't bring up the pregnancy either. She didn't push. Maybe she was waiting for me to come around. Then one evening she sent me a text. Can you come over? We need to talk. My stomach twisted. I stared at the message for a long time before finally replying. Be there soon. When I got to her place, she was sitting at the kitchen table. In front of her was a small stack of papers. What's this? I asked, sitting across from her. She took a deep breath. Options. I frowned. Options for what? She hesitated, then said, for you. If you don't want to be involved. I stared at her. What do you mean? She slid one of the papers toward me. It was something legal, termination of parental rights. If you sign this, she said quietly, you won't have to be responsible for anything. No child support, no custody, nothing. You can walk away. I swallowed hard. You're giving me a way out? She nodded. I know this isn't what you wanted, and I don't want you to feel trapped. I picked up the papers, staring at it. The words blurred together. This was it, my way out. But instead of relief, all I felt was something else, something heavy. You really think I should just walk away? I asked. She shrugged. I don't know. I just don't want you to hate me for keeping it. I set the paper down. I don't hate you. She let out a breath, looking away. It feels like you do. I didn't know what to say to that. After a long pause, I asked, what if I don't sign it? She looked at me then. Hope flickered in her eyes. Then we figure it out, she said. I ran a hand down my face. I still didn't have answers. I still didn't know what the hell I was going to do. But for the first time, I wasn't thinking about running. For the first time, I was thinking about staying. I didn't sign the papers. I didn't know if it was the right choice, but something about walking away completely didn't sit right with me. I wasn't ready to be a father, but I also wasn't ready to pretend this wasn't happening. She didn't push me for an answer that night. We just sat there in silence, the weight of the situation settling between us. The next few weeks were strange. I was still trying to process everything, still trying to figure out what my role in all of this was supposed to be. But something had shifted. I started asking questions. When's your next appointment? How are you feeling? Do you need anything? She seemed surprised at first, then cautiously hopeful. I wasn't suddenly excited about becoming a dad, but I wasn't ignoring it anymore. Then one evening she dropped a bomb on me. I'm moving, she said. I looked up from my phone. What? I can't afford this place anymore, she admitted. I found a smaller apartment across town. It's cheaper, but it's not great. I frowned. When were you going to tell me? Now, she said simply. I ran a hand through my hair. How bad is it? She hesitated. It's not that bad, but it's not exactly ideal for a baby. I sighed, rubbing my temples. What are you going to do? She shrugged. Make it work. I don't have another choice. I stared at her, something twisting in my chest. You could stay with me, I said before I could think it through. Her eyes widened. What? I swallowed hard. It's not like I have a great place either, but it's better than whatever hole in the wall you're talking about. At least until we figure something out. She was quiet for a long moment. Are you sure? I wasn't. But I nodded anyway. Yeah. And just like that, everything changed again. Moving her in wasn't as dramatic as I thought it would be. She didn't have much, just a few boxes, some clothes, and random baby books she'd started collecting. We weren't suddenly a couple playing house. It was awkward at first, navigating this weird in-between space where we were more than just exes, but not exactly together. But it was manageable. Then came the night I felt the baby kick. She was lying on the couch, one hand resting on her stomach, when she suddenly grabbed my wrist. Feel this, she whispered, pressing my hand against her belly. I almost pulled away. But then I felt it. A tiny, unexpected movement. I froze. That's weird, I muttered. She laughed softly. Yeah. I didn't know what to say. It was the first time the pregnancy had felt real in a way I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just an idea anymore. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a person. And for the first time, I wasn't just scared. I was something else too. After that night, something shifted. I still wasn't excited about being a dad, but I couldn't pretend this wasn't happening anymore. The baby, my baby, was real, and whether I was ready or not, he or she was coming. I started paying more attention. She didn't ask for much, but I noticed things. The way she winced when she got up too fast. How exhausted she was at the end of the day. How she'd always left the last few bites of her food, even though I knew she was still hungry. One night, I stopped by the store on my way home and grabbed a few extra things. Snacks she liked, some vitamins, a pack of those weird pregnancy-safe protein bars she kept looking at but never bought. When I set them on the counter, she stared at them. You didn't have to do this, she said quietly. I shrugged, suddenly feeling awkward. It's not a big deal. She smiled. It is. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just mumbled something about needing a shower and walked away. But later that night, I heard her crying in her room. I didn't ask why. I already knew. One afternoon, we sat at the kitchen table, going through baby names. She had a list. Of course she did. I was thinking something classic, she said, tapping her pen against the paper. Not too trendy, not too old-fashioned. I smirked. So no names like Storm or Wolf. She rolled her eyes. No. How about Kevin? I offered. She made a face. That sounds like a middle-aged insurance salesman. I laughed. Fair point. She tapped the paper again. What about Oliver? I considered it. Not bad. Or if it's a girl, maybe Sophia. I nodded. I like it. She smiled, then hesitated. Do you want to know the gender? I thought about it. A month ago, I wouldn't have cared. But now, yeah, I admitted. Her smile widened. We find out next week. I didn't say it out loud, but for the first time, I was looking forward to something. The ultrasound room was dimly lit, the monitor flickering to life as the technician prepped her belly with gel. You ready? She asked, glancing at us. She nodded eagerly. I just swallowed hard and nodded too. Then there it was. A tiny moving figure on the screen. A heartbeat, fast and steady. And then, it's a boy, the technician announced with a smile. She let out a soft gasp, her hands covering her mouth. I just stared. A boy. My son. I hadn't cried in years. Not at funerals. Not at breakups. Not at anything. But in that moment, something cracked open in me. And for the first time, I let it. After the ultrasound, everything felt more real than ever. We were having a son. I thought knowing the gender would calm me down, make me feel more prepared. It didn't. If anything, it made it scarier. I wasn't just bringing a baby into the world. I was bringing someone into it. A kid who would look up to me, who would need me. And I had no idea how to be a father. One evening, I sat on the couch, lost in thought. She sat beside me, resting her hands on her growing belly. You're quiet, she said. I shrugged. Just thinking. About what? I hesitated. Then finally, I admitted it. What if I'm not good at this? She tilted her head. At what? Being a dad. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You're already trying. That's more than a lot of people do. I shook my head. That doesn't mean I won't mess it up. You will, she said simply. So will I. But we'll figure it out. I looked at her. You really believe that? She smiled. Yeah, I do. I wasn't sure I did yet. But for the first time, I wanted to. The months passed faster than I expected. One minute we were arguing over baby names and who got the last slice of pizza. The next, we were rushing to the hospital in the middle of the night. She gripped my hand so tight I thought she'd break it. Remind me, she gasped between contractions, why we did this without an epidural. You wanted a natural experience, I reminded her. She groaned. I was stupid. I laughed, even though I was terrified. The delivery was long, exhausting. But when I heard that first tiny cry, everything else disappeared. The nurse placed him in her arms, and I swear I forgot how to breathe. He was so small, so perfect. A tiny wrinkled thing with dark eyes that blinked up at the world for the first time. Say hi to your son, she whispered. I reached out, hesitating for a second before gently touching his little hand. His fingers curled around mine, barely bigger than my thumb. And in that moment I knew. I wasn't ready. I didn't have all the answers. But I loved him. More than I ever thought I could. Life didn't magically become easy after he was born. If anything, it got harder. Sleepless nights, endless crying, diapers, bottles, more diapers. We were exhausted, broke, figuring things out as we went. But we were doing it. One evening I came home from work to find her asleep on the couch, the baby curled up on her chest. I stood there for a moment, just watching them. A few months ago, I would have given anything to escape this. Now, I couldn't imagine life without it. Without him. Without her. I sat down beside them, gently stroking my son's tiny head. He stirred but didn't wake. I smiled. Hey, little man, I whispered. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was just ready.